Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into something that's a little bit unsettling?
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be talking about a potential government shutdown, and to make things even more interesting, it's all happening right before the holidays.
Oh, boy.
We're basing this deep dive on a press release from the U.S. Travel Association,
Okay.
and let me tell you, they're sending out some pretty serious warning signals.
Yeah, definitely.
So to help us break down all of the potential fallout, especially the economic side of things,
Yeah.
and how this could even delay disaster relief efforts, we've got an expert here with us today.
Hi, everyone.
So to kick things off, can you give us a quick rundown on what a government shutdown actually is? I mean, we hear about it all the time in the news.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean for everyday life?
So imagine like a bunch of essential services, just suddenly hitting the pause button.
Oh, wow.
That's kind of what a shutdown is.
Okay.
It happens when Congress can't agree on a budget, which means that a lot of federal agencies end up having to temporarily close up shop.
Okay.
Think about it like national parks shutting down,
Wow.
passport and visa processing, slowing down to a crawl. And there's a potential for even disruptions to things like air travel.
Speaking of air travel, the U.S. Travel Association is predicting that the travel industry could lose $1 billion
$1 billion.
every week
Oh, wow.
if this shutdown happens.
Yeah.
So is that just airlines, or are we talking about a bigger ripple effect?
Oh, it's definitely way bigger than just airlines.
Okay,
Think about it. If you're worried about your flight being canceled, are you still booking that hotel?
probably not.
Right.
Yeah,
So that means hotels start losing money.
right.
And then the restaurants that they recommend to their guests, they also lose out. And then even those restaurant suppliers start to feel the pinch too.
Oh, wow.
It's like this chain reaction.
Yeah,
And it can really impact a whole community.
and I bet it just makes an already stressful holiday travel season even worse.
Oh, absolutely.
I could just picture like those TSA lines, snaking around the airport.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone's on edge trying to get where they need to go.
Yeah, you can definitely expect longer TSA lines. But also with the shutdown, there's the potential for reduced staffing at Customs and Border Protection.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which could lead to some major delays for international travel.
Oh, God.
And if you're thinking about renewing your passport
Right.
or applying for a visa,
Yeah.
be prepared for things to move a lot slower than usual.
Ugh. Okay, so the U.S. Travel Association did a survey,
Okay.
and it turns out that 60% of Americans would just reconsider their travel plans completely if there's a shutdown. So that's a pretty strong indicator that people are taking this threat seriously.
Yeah, seems like it.
And what's interesting is that same survey, it was conducted by Ipsos, found that the blame for a shutdown isn't really falling on just one side of the aisle. That's interesting.
Both political parties would likely share the blame, which I guess highlights that this is a concern that kind of transcends, party lines.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense considering that 81% of Americans think shutdowns just hurt the economy in general.
Yeah.
And 86% say they just create headaches for air travel.
Ugh. Yeah, for sure.
And 83% think that all of those businesses that rely on travel and tourism,
Right.
like our national parks,
Yeah.
museums,
Mhm.
all the local shops,
Yeah.
they all take a hit.
Yeah, they do.
So it really does affect everybody.
It does.
And what's really striking is that 88% of those surveyed believe that Congress should be working together
Together.
to prevent this from even happening.
Wow.
And maybe even more powerful
Uh-huh.
is that 69% said they would be less likely to support a representative who
Wow.
votes for a shutdown.
That's huge.
Yeah, it's a pretty clear message
It is.
from the public.
Yeah.
We don't want this.
So we've got this potential travel nightmare kind of brewing.
But the press release from the U.S. Travel Association also brought up another major concern:
Okay.
disaster relief.
Right.
It sounds like a lack of funding due to a shutdown could really slow down recovery efforts in areas that have recently been hit by disasters.
Yeah, this is where things start to get really concerning.
Yeah.
Because a shutdown might cause these temporary disruptions for travelers.
Right.
But this lack of funding for disaster relief could have much more long-term and devastating consequences
Okay.
for the communities that are trying to rebuild.
And to be specific, they're talking about pushing back recovery timelines by years,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, they mentioned that delaying disaster relief funding until 2025 could mean that those communities won't actually fully recover until 2026, maybe even later.
Yeah, and it's important to understand that disaster relief funding
Yeah.
isn't just some abstract concept. It's about real help.
Yeah.
Things like FEMA assistance for individuals and families,
Mm-hmm.
SBA loans for businesses that are trying to get back on their feet, and funding to help rebuild critical infrastructure.
Okay.
Without that money flowing in recovery, it just grinds to a halt.
So to give you an idea, it usually takes between 10 and 27 months for a community to recover after a major disaster.
That's a long time.
It is. But if this funding is pushed back,
Right.
we're looking at adding years onto that timeline.
Oh, wow.
And the press release specifically mentioned North Carolina and Tennessee
Okay.
as areas that could be especially hard hit
Oh, gosh.
by these delays.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the people in those communities.
Yeah.
Families that have been displaced from their homes,
Yeah.
businesses that are struggling to reopen,
Mm-hmm.
entire towns that are facing an even longer road to recovery.
Yeah.
Wow, it sounds like a double whammy.
It really is.
A government shutdown, creating chaos for travelers,
Yeah.
and putting the brakes on disaster relief for those who need it most.
Absolutely. It's a really sobering reminder of just how interconnected all of our systems are and how political decisions can have these very real-world consequences, especially for those who are already facing some really difficult circumstances.
Yeah.
It really underscores the urgency of this situation as Congress gets ready to leave for the holidays.
It does.
Yeah,
So it's almost like this potential shutdown throws a wrench into the gears of the whole country.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about the impact on travel and disaster relief, but what about the broader economic fallout?
Yeah.
Is that billion-dollar-a-week figure from earlier really a realistic estimate?
It's definitely a wake-up call.
Yeah.
And remember, that estimate only covers the travel industry.
Right.
The ripple effects actually spread much wider.
Oh, wow.
To understand the full impact, you really have to consider the human element.
Okay.
The federal workers who are directly affected by this.
Right, because during a shutdown, a lot of federal employees end up furloughed,
Exactly.
which means they're temporarily out of work
Right.
and without a paycheck.
And many of those furloughed employees are the very people who keep our airports running smoothly.
Oh, gosh, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, so think TSA agents,
Right.
air traffic controllers, customs officials.
Oh, yeah,
These are critical roles.
they are.
And if they're not there, the entire system starts to break down.
So it's not just the stress of like longer lines.
Right.
We're talking about potential flight delays, cancellations,
Yeah.
maybe even entire airports having to reduce operations.
Precisely. And that uncertainty trickles down to the airlines themselves.
Oh, wow.
People start canceling their travel plans because they just don't know if they'll actually be able to get where they need to go.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that drop in bookings directly impacts airline revenue, which can lead to cost-cutting measures
Oh, gosh.
and potentially even job losses within the industry.
And this isn't just speculation, right?
Right.
We've seen this happen before.
Exactly. The U.S. Travel Association actually cited a loss of $11 billion from past holiday shutdowns, which really underscores the economic fragility that comes with these events.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the immediate losses.
Oh.
Shutdowns can actually erode consumer confidence,
Oh, really?
making people hesitant to travel or spend money even after things supposedly go back to normal.
So it's like a long-term effect.
Exactly.
Wow. It seems like this shutdown threat comes with a whole host of potential consequences.
It does.
From travel disruptions to economic turmoil.
Yeah.
It touches so many aspects of our lives.
It really does.
But let's circle back to something we discussed earlier.
Okay.
The impact on disaster relief.
Right.
What happens to those communities that are already struggling
Yeah.
when funding for their recovery gets delayed?
That's where the consequences of a shutdown become truly devastating.
Okay.
We're not just talking about inconveniences anymore.
Right.
We're talking about potentially pushing back those recovery timelines by years. Yeah, which can have a profound impact on people's lives and livelihoods.
And remember, the typical recovery timeline after a major disaster is already lengthy.
Yeah.
Anywhere from 10 to 27 months.
It's a long time.
It is. But if this funding is delayed, we're talking about adding years onto that timeline.
And to really grasp what that delay means, you have to think about the specific needs of these disaster-stricken communities.
Okay.
They need immediate aid,
Right.
temporary housing, food assistance,
Right.
but they also need that long-term support to rebuild infrastructure,
Okay.
revitalize businesses,
Mm-hmm.
and provide mental health services to those who've been traumatized by the disaster.
So it's not just about like getting back to normal.
Right.
It's about creating a pathway for these communities to heal and thrive again.
Exactly. And that pathway becomes much steeper and more difficult to navigate when funding is delayed.
Oh, for sure.
Imagine the ripple effect on local economies,
Yeah.
families that are struggling to rebuild their lives,
Mm-hmm.
and the emotional toll of that prolonged uncertainty.
It makes you realize that these political decisions in Washington
Yeah,
have very real consequences for people on the ground,
we do.
especially those who are already vulnerable. The
Absolutely.
human costs just can't be ignored.
It really can't. And it raises important questions about our priorities as a nation.
Yeah.
How do we balance the need for fiscal responsibility with the urgency of helping those in need,
Right.
particularly in the wake of these devastating disasters?
We've talked about the travel nightmares and the economic fallout
Yeah.
and the huge impact on disaster relief.
Mm-hmm.
But what I find really interesting is how the public feels about all of this.
Yeah.
You know, the U.S. Travel Association press release talked about an Ipsos survey,
Right.
and it seems like people are really paying attention to this issue.
Yeah, what's interesting is that there's this almost unanimous sentiment against government shutdowns.
Really?
The survey data shows that people really understand that these shutdowns just have these far-reaching negative consequences.
I mean, 81% agree that they hurt the economy.
Yeah.
86% say they mess up air travel.
Yeah.
Those are some pretty strong indicators that people are not happy about this.
And it goes even deeper than that.
Okay.
83% believe that shutdowns negatively impact all those businesses that depend on tourism.
Yeah.
You know, our national parks, museums, your favorite local restaurant.
Right.
It's a ripple effect that is felt throughout entire communities.
It's like this collective understanding that shutdowns don't just impact Washington.
Right.
They hit home for people in a very real way.
Exactly. And what I find particularly encouraging is that 88% of those who were surveyed believe that Congress should just find a way to work together to prevent a shutdown.
Wow. So they're looking for compromise.
They are.
That's a good sign.
It is, and there's real power in that.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider that 69% of those respondents said they would be less likely to actually vote for a representative who supports a shutdown.
Oh, wow. So that sends a pretty clear message
It does.
to those in power.
It highlights the importance of holding our elected officials accountable for their decisions.
Their decisions, yeah.
You know, voters are paying attention, and they're looking for leaders who will prioritize collaboration and finding common ground.
Especially when the stakes are this high.
Absolutely.
So we've covered a lot of ground today, from potential travel disruptions to economic concerns and this really critical issue of disaster relief funding.
We have.
What's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with?
You know, government shutdowns aren't just political chess moves.
Right.
They have real-world consequences that impact all of us.
They do.
It's about recognizing that all of our systems are interconnected.
Yeah.
How a decision made in Washington can ripple out and affect families, businesses, and entire communities.
Absolutely. And it's not just about inconvenience. It's about people's livelihoods. Their ability to recover from disasters and just the overall well-being of our nation.
Precisely so. As we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I would encourage everyone listening to stay informed. Engage in thoughtful conversations about this. And most importantly, make your voice heard.
That's right.
Research where your representatives stand on government shutdowns, disaster relief funding.
Okay.
These are complex issues.
There they are.
But understanding the stakes and participating in informed civic dialogue is crucial.
It is.
You know, it's a crucial step towards creating a more resilient and responsive government.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
And remember, we're all in this together.
We are.
Informed action starts with understanding the issues.
Yeah.
And we hope this conversation has empowered you to do just that.
I hope so too.